Okay, we're live.
All right, good evening, everyone. Just make sure this is on. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's legacy session. It is our third and final conversation in the powerful 3-day journey of education, truth-telling, and the collective memory leading into the joyful celebration of Juneteenth. My name is Abigail Masters, former president of the St. John's University NAACP chapter and proud servant of youth advocacy within the NAACP Youth and College Division. So as we gather tonight for a rich dialogue on justice reform and second chances, we do so with urgency and vision, knowing that the fight for liberation surely does continue. Now, these legacy sessions have served as the groundwork for tomorrow's celebration at Roy Wilkins Park, and if freedom is the celebration, then truth must be the prerequisite. So tonight, we are going beyond. We'll be talking policy, lived experiences, healing, and what it really means to return and to be restored. And we have a powerful panel here to do just that. And so I am delighted to introduce a panel of individuals whose work speaks directly to the heart of justice, reform, and community advancement. So we have Mr. Kevin Livingston. Kevin Livingston is the founder and CEO of 100 Suits and for 100 Men, and also leads 100 Suits LLC and Henry Clayton Group Incorporated. Since 2011, he has suited over 150,000 individuals, including youth and returning citizens, and launched the 750K Empower Queens program and $2 million DOE investment. He's a community leader. He's partnered with campaigns like Rock Nation, Know Your Rights Camp, and Rough Riders Rescue. Welcome, Kevin. And we also have Dr. Divine Pryor. Dr. Pryor is the co-founder, CEO, and president of the People's Police Academy, housed at Medgar Evers College. He formerly served as executive director of the Center for New Leadership on Urban Solutions. With a background in criminal justice, public health, and social services, he's led programs on HIV, AIDS, domestic violence, and substance abuse, and provides support to organizations like Community Capacity Development and the Fortune Society. Welcome. All right, so we'll be getting into our questions for tonight. So to ground us, I'd love to start with the heart behind the work. So what personal or professional experiences first motivated you to engage in justice reform or second chance initiatives? Helping us in.
I just cared. Ain't no special moment. You know what I'm saying? Like I wanted to change. I saw what was happening in Jamaica. I was a customer service rep at Carver Bank on the corner right over here. And I wanted to help my people. That's it.
And as it should be, Dr. Pryor.
I think for me, I have recollections of being a young black male in the public school system, and I was very inquisitive. And I think that the system wasn't prepared for the questions I was asking, so rather than appreciate it, they began to label me as being a nuisance and said that I was incorrigible. And, that led me to the streets, who embraced me very warmly. And in fact, I remember very specifically someone said, yeah, because we heard that you know how to start a car without a key. And I said, yeah, they call it hot wiring. And they said, yeah, come on and hang with us. And that's how I got introduced to the streets, and I got a lot of love. And who doesn't want love?
Right.
But love for the wrong reasons could, bring you down a path of destruction. So I eventually ended up in the prison industrial complex, and that's when I was reintroduced to my love for learning. And I started my journey in advocacy because I was asking the question, how does a young man who loves reading, writing, math, science end up in a prison cell? That doesn't make sense. And I wonder how many more men like me are in that same situation. And I found out there was quite a few. And that was my journey. And we're going back now to the early 80s. So I'm kind of aging myself. But yeah, that's where my journey began. It first started out personally, and then professionally, me starting to ask questions and more questions, and that led me to my, work in criminal justice.
Wow. Wow, thank you so much. It's so amazing to see how the path of curiosity and passion can merge and take you to lens such as these. So thank you so much. Is it possible if you could share a moment when you saw policy change or community action directly improve someone's chance at a successful reentry?
Again, my journey in just changing. I was always a believer that I can put a dent in the universe, and I didn't care about my educational background, which I had none. You know, I didn't go like everybody starts an organization. They want to throw all this stupid data at you, or you know, they want to go to community boards and just talk. And I literally took suits and put them on the corner of Parsons in front of Popeyes and started giving it out to people and just kind of answering your question. 5 years later, I was in Pathmark and a gentleman stopped me in the MTA uniform and said, "Man, I appreciate you." I didn't know who he was. And he was like, "Yeah, I was out there and you gave me a suit for an interview, and I was on my way to an interview with MTA, and now he's a supervisor with MTA."
Wow.
You know, that's my data.
Yeah.
First starting, you know, obviously 100 suits have grown into a lot, but you know, those are my data points.
Right, and it just starts.
Just kind of getting the humanistic standpoint and still seeing people that you've helped, because 100 suits makes 15 years in January. Like we didn't, you know, and you know, by the grace of God and a ton of failure, right? It took 1 year for us to continue,
Wow.
and we did.
Yes, wow. Thank you so much for sharing, Dr. Barry.
You know, I've been involved in policy work for a long time. A lot of people who do organizing work and advocacy work, I don't think they've grasped the depth and breadth of what policy actually does. Policy actually runs our lives. Policy determines whether or not they're going to build a school or a jail. Policy determines whether or not they're going to have a new transportation route that's going to come through your block.
Yeah.
Policy is going to determine whether or not they're going to invest in education or incarceration. And so once I developed an appreciation for policy, I got real excited, you know, and wanted to be at the policy table. So, I mean, there's so many policies, but one in particular I remember is when the policy to restore Pell Grants back to individuals who were incarcerated was a powerful policy. Why? Because there was a time when I was going through the system in the 80s, there was a proliferation of college programs. And there was a lot of individuals who were taking advantage of that. And then they stopped the program. The funding for Pell Grants on the federal level was stopped, and then it was followed by New York State TAP grants, and all college programs were eliminated. And through advocacy work, and I worked with a number of folks, not only in the city, but the state and outside of the state, we were able to get the Pell Grants restored back, and then eventually TAP grants, so now people who are incarcerated can go back to school. So that is a powerful policy. But there are many, many policies that I'm excited about. There was a policy one time, I recall, that women who were giving birth while incarcerated had to be handcuffed to their beds. And we advocated for that, and Senator Velmanet Montgomery led the charge on that, and we, in 1995, got them to change the policy that they could not have a woman handcuffed while giving birth. I think that was so inhumane. So there are a number of policies. We could talk policy from now until the end of time. I love talking about it, I love doing it. Policy is powerful, and I would like to get more people interested in doing it.
Absolutely, thank you for sharing. So we see that there is a variety of avenues that we can bring tangible change. So thank you so much. So speaking of policy, we're going to go right into that aspect because legislation has long shaped how justice operates, and we are seeing both progress and pushback in real time. So to all of you, how can individuals, whether elected officials, community members, or advocates, support effective legislative change at the local or state level?
Well, for one, is you have to realize that you are the change. If there's something that you're not seeing in your community that is not in law, you can literally go to your elected official, explain to them your idea, and let them know that you would like to do something and get this written into legislation. I, for one, right now, have in the process, through New York City Council, am trying to get a Men's History Month in the month of January, which has never happened, so that we can celebrate men just as much as we celebrate our queens. I don't know nothing about no policy. I said, I don't see this, right? We need to be celebrated too, right? And so, you know, that's one avenue you can absolutely go to. You can also advocate for active policies, right? One I was really, really passionate about was ban the box that Jumaane Williams was pushing when they were, you know, you had to check if you was a felon or whatever have you, right? And I thought that was a big hindrance coming into the workforce. And so you can always join on to those advocates that are pushing these policies. My sister Shawana Inhart, based out of Michigan, is doing a policy for those that are women that are incarcerated, that their children, that there's an automatic nursery built in the jail that doesn't have any bars, right? Because we know if children are put in that kind of atmosphere from the birth, it can have a negative effect on them in the long run. And so there's many avenues, but you do not have to write, I mean, that's one way, but you can literally go to your elected official and be the change that you want to see.
Yep, definitely.
Absolutely, I could not agree more. Policy develops, people think it's linear, but policy is cyclical, policy is multifaceted, and there are many different avenues to actually get, you know, to a policy. There's some that are local, there are some that are national, that are regional, and others that are national. I think it starts with information. Before you can do anything, irregardless of which role you take, you have to be informed. You have to put in the work, you know, and it requires a discipline that will propel you to a point where you can begin to be a voice for a particular issue. And then you use that time wisely to make sure that people are informed of the issues, that we know the ins and outs of an issue, because there's nothing new under the sun. So many of these things have been approached before, and unfortunately, a lot of times we were not successful. I think the success comes from that multifaceted approach. You know, you got people who are on the ground, and people on the ground have a job to do. But then you also have people who are spokespersons, you have people who are writers, then you have elected officials, but then you also have the faith community has to be brought in. So you got to bring in all the voices, and you have to really put pressure. Most legislators will tell you that I will do what you want me to do, but you have to make me do it. They're not going to do it on their own. So we have to use these various different techniques and strategies in order to put pressure on legislators to do what it is that we elected them to do. That's how we move the policy across the finish line.
I couldn't agree more. Mobilization is imperative and effective. Thank you so much. All right.
Oh, sorry.
Everyone, we have Tracy Gardner in the building. She is the Executive Director of National Black Harm Reduction Network and the former Senior VP of Policy and Advocacy at the Legal Action Center. And she was also appointed by Attorney General Letitia James to the Opioid Settlement Fund Advisory Board. So it is wonderful to have you here with us tonight.
Thank you.
All right, so we are continuing our conversation in policy and advocacy, and definitely want to open up the question to you as well as to how individuals, whether they are elected officials, community members, or advocates, how can they support effective legislative change at the local or state level?
How can they support it?
Well, that's the easy one.
Brother Pryor.
Go ahead and knock that out the park.
Well, I came in and I heard Brother Pryor talking about it's about consistency and discipline, and the fact that it is cyclical and repetitive. So I tell people who want to do policy advocacy work that if they want to see results right away, they've picked the wrong field. They should go work at McDonald's because that's fast. This is not fast. And so advocacy that I know that we've been involved in has required a long view, right? And that the change can be sometimes incremental, or it can be like it was in 2009, leaps.
Yes.
And you have no control over the environment in which the policy happens, But what you do have control over is your reputation,
Yes.
to be a consistent and reliable resource to those who are making decisions and those who look to you as either expert or loudmouth.
Ooh.
And loudmouths are especially cherished because loudmouths influence, right? So before there was social media influencer, there was that neighbor of yours that you would see in the supermarket, and she would give you her mind about what was going on in the community, and maybe even about that particular local official. And elections are their focus, right? They want the continuity. So elections are won by 10 or less votes, you know, and that person, that loudmouth, could have an impact on those 10 votes going one way or another.
Man, thank you for sharing. So definitely speaking more on the parole and release conditions. When we talk about reentry, we have to talk about supervision and presence because for many, the conditions placed on them after incarceration become a new form of restriction. So, to Mr. Livingston, in your mentoring of returning citizens, what common obstacles do they face during parole hearings, and how can we advocate for fairer supervision practices?
So we had an office in parole up until about 2019, but we prepare them while they're still incarcerated. So I have an office inside of Rikers Island, inside the EMTC building, where we run a fatherhood club, and we also have a suiting boutique for those that are going to court, and more importantly, getting a suit to go home. And one way within our fatherhood club, we have a mentorship moment, and so they're able to talk about some of the things. We don't really deal with parole, we deal with probation, and because they're doing city time, so either they're coming home or they're dealing with a probation officer, which we have a partnership with Queens Probation. We make sure that they understand this, because everybody's constraint is different, right? But we prepare them for their re-entry into society. So to answer your question, we necessarily don't prepare them for parole, probation. We prepare them for a job. We prepare them for reintegration into their children's life. We prepare them for housing assistance. We prepare them for dealing with child support when they're behind thousands upon thousands upon thousands of dollars, and making sure that Department of Social Services can meet them halfway. There's a program a lot of brothers don't know that if you pay 50% of your child support, they will wipe out the rest, but nobody knows about this here, right? And a lot of brothers that are incarcerated are racking these charges up. A lot of brothers, so I'm really passionate on the advocacy aspect of knowing their rights, knowing that they can vote, registering to vote while they're still incarcerated. Our fatherhood program, we graduated 32 fathers. We had them reunite with their children while they were incarcerated. They brought their children to the jail. And we were able to bond with them, so when they come home, it's an easier thing. So we really don't focus on parole and probation.
Wow.
Well, we can talk about the opportunities of parole and probation. You want to jump in? Because I'm going to talk about my issue.
Yeah,
It's
well,
so interesting. I was going to ask you, on your work with the police accountability, how do parole supervision, even the protocols, how do they perpetuate or mitigate systemic bias, and what reforms are needed? So you could just go along those lines.
this is a loaded question. I'm glad my brother Kevin, brought it to the forefront because let's just deal with what he was discussing, child support. If an attorney, is a seasoned attorney and he has a client who has been convicted of a crime and about to be sentenced, I would hope that he's knowledgeable enough to submit a petition to the court to have his child support payments suspended while he's going to be incarcerated, because that's not happening right now. What's happening is individuals who are convicted and they are sent to prison are continuing to accumulate child support. So imagine somebody spending 5, 10, 15, 20 years in prison and their child support payments are accumulated and with interest. So they come home with $150,000 financial burden on their back, on top of the fact that because they have a conviction, they're going to have difficulties getting a job, on top of the fact that they're being denied housing in certain places because they have a conviction, on top of the fact. So there are just so many what they call civil barriers to individuals returning home, and you have to have a skilled proponent of the system in order to, they're like layers, like an onion, you have to peel them back, and they're a myriad of issues, not to mention the fact that you have to make a emotional and psychological adjustment. You want to reunite with your children, you want to then get into the world, and you want to be responsible, but first you have to adjust yourself to a reality that's totally different from the one you just left. I'm writing 2 books right now, and one of the books is really dealing with the psychological aspects of reentry. What is it that an individual has to endure when they return back to a society that they've been removed from for a prolonged period of time and placed in an environment that is void of human feelings and emotions? Because an individual in prison, and I'll stop here, has to disconnect from their emotions. It's a part of the survival. I know firsthand, so I'm not speaking theory. I'm speaking firsthand. In order for you to survive, you got to disconnect from your emotions. Imagine someone walking around saying, I'm kind and compassionate. You know, you wouldn't last a day. Because in order for you to protect yourself, you have to put on the mask, and you have to demonstrate that I don't take no mess from no one, and you have to be able to live up to that if the situation calls for it. And if you do that for years, then you lose your sense of sensitivity and thoughtfulness and kindness, and that has to be restored, and it doesn't automatically, you don't hit a switch. You have to go through therapy. There needs to be some clinical intervention, some mental health support to help you restore yourself back to that place of humanity that you have lost.
That's right. And that the investments that we should be making in supporting people returning are not done, right? So where I have especially focused in my career is on that intersection of justice and health. And that, Divine and I met each other in the early 90s, where HIV and AIDS was so prevalent in the correction system, both jail and the state correction system. And while people wanted to discount it, it was a reflection of the communities that were battling HIV and AIDS, because Rockefeller drug laws helped to contribute to the imbalance in the communities that made it vulnerable to these diseases. The same communities that were hit by crack, COVID, and now overdose, and any other health emergency. But this idea, I was taught by formerly incarcerated people about some of the systemic trip-ups, like when people leave, how they have only emergency Medicaid. So they leave corrections and they try to get engaged in healthcare or treatment, mental health, substance use disorder treatment, and they can't. All they can do is go to the emergency room. And really looking into the wonky side of why that's the case. The case is because the Medicaid law restricts coverage of care for anybody who was incarcerated. And that is where you get to really peel back the racist underpinnings of so much of what has gone on in this history. Everything, so much has gone toward how can we keep a benefit happening for Black people. That is, as American as apple pie, is that we have policies where that is embedded. So we have been working, even before I got to Legal Action Center, and I was there since 2001, about how do we make Medicaid support the work that's happening for individuals before they come out. But even further, we have to understand that folks are hurting before they even come into the justice system, right? That in many ways they are their sickest and they're their most vulnerable in terms of their health, mental health, and physical health, and corrections does not do anything to make that better. Correctional health is outside of and not subject to the same kind of standards that we should hold for health. And so people go in sick, they stay sick, their health care and how they get it inside is completely disconnected from the health care that they're expected to get outside. And then we demand that they get a job, housing, reconcile with their family, and become productive citizens without building in and acknowledging the trauma before, the trauma during, and the trauma of re-entering. Right? So that's the other thing, is that we need to look at the fact that people can't pursue these issues that will reduce their likelihood of recidivism if we don't ensure that their health is stabilized. They can't get anything else or hold it. You can't get somebody connected to a job if they're still struggling with health and mental health issues. And I include substance use disorder in that because the overdose rate is the highest among people coming out of corrections and residential treatment. And a lot of that has to do with the substandard care that's happening in corrections. On the residential treatment side, it's this failure to acknowledge that people will go back to using once they leave if the supports aren't there, right? So we put a lot of emphasis on the acute, and we don't put enough emphasis and support on the reentry and the reintegration and the recovery.
Ooh. That's it. That's drop the mic.
Like the next question was, what harm reduction strategies have you seen to make the biggest difference when it comes to the reduction of recidivism? So,
I was just gonna, well, on that one, that's an easy one. Housing.
right. Yeah.
There's really, we grew up in HIV where housing is healthcare, because people with HIV and the complicated medications that came into effect in 1996, you have to be housed. And that's also where Housing First came from. I don't need you to be sober. I don't need you to be clean for you to be deserving of a home, which will then stabilize you. And we saw that during COVID. We were able to stabilize people who came out of Rikers because of COVID in hotels, but they were stabilized and able to decompress from that situation, and then they were more capable of then pursuing transitional and permanent housing. Housing is the beginning and the end. That's the harm reduction intervention.
Thank you for sharing. Wow. So which partnerships, and this is for all of you, which partnerships, whether it's public, private, or nonprofit, have proven to be the most effective when it comes to connecting returning citizens to stable housing and meaningful employment?
I'll start. So returning citizens, I've been in Rikers Island going up 9 years now. I started when the GMDC was open, and I was in a Crip house, 6 Main, and I started doing poetry in the jails. That's how I got in the jails. I went to Rosie's, performed poetry, and then I started bringing in people. I had a principal, a dude from the street, and now mind you, I never did a day in jail. I may owe a couple of traffic tickets, but I never did a day in jail. But I care. And I remember it doing something to me when I was in GMDC in the academic hall and seeing these young people having a good time, feeling themselves, but then having to be sheeped out of the building to their housing units. And I started working with my brother Colin Kaepernick, who's an NFL legend and civil rights activist. And we started doing Know Your Rights workshops in the jail. I remember in 2017, I went around to every housing unit in GMD
Than us, and we are ready and prepared to turn the mantle over. So don't think for a second that we're holding on to.
I would just add, two things. One is, I am delighted to hear about the celebrity involvement in these kinds of issues. But there's also the issue of stigma and the issue of drug use and our relationship with drug use, drug policy, the war on drugs, has made issues around, what I'm working on, very difficult to find a champion on. And Black New Yorkers over 55 are dying the most, right? Black maternal deaths due to drug use are the top. And yet, we don't have folks wanting to acknowledge it because they have a picture of who's on the street and who deserves help and who doesn't, when in fact 40% of the overdose deaths are happening in private homes. They're happening among your aunties and uncles and your grandparents, and you may think, oh, they've been in recovery for all this time, but there's fentanyl in the street. And so even a dip and a dab, we're talking about young people coming in with mental health stress, and when they don't get treated well, and often they don't in the mental health system, they take matters into their own hands. And so you think it's a Percocet, but if it's dusted with fentanyl and you don't use opioids, you will die before you on the spot. And so there is that piece of bringing in these kind of partners to understand it's not cosmetic. We need you here with impact. And then finally, I was raised by primarily Black and Latino women living with HIV, in and out of the criminal justice system, in and out of dealing with the foster care system, the addiction treatment system. The experiences of women in justice, women returning, is completely different.
Absolutely.
And the default setting of the correction system is male, but the way in which women, how they're even have programming in the female correctional settings, and I'm getting a little choked up because I'm thinking about Rusty Miller Hill, who was a sister and mentor, and someone who had been involved in all of these systems. And she always talked about the fact that people didn't welcome her back home, right? They didn't have a coming home party for her. She had to come back home to upset family, disarray in the household, children who were resentful. And the supports for her, because they're primarily geared to men, weren't there. Mm-hmm. So the big partnership, I would say, particularly for women, is other women-led kinds of entities like WCJA, my sister Reverend Sharon Hardigan. Mm-hmm. We talk about these issues and have to keep the impact on women and their families paramount.
Thank you for sharing that perspective. That was needed. Welcome, Mr. Ruben Wills. It is great to see you. Ruben Wills is the founder and CEO of Policy Incorporated. And I wanted to ask along those lines, here we go, from your work in policy development, which legislative change would you say, whether it's a matter of cash bail, reform, sentencing adjustments, what do you believe is most urgent for Black communities and why?
Jump right in.
Right. First, let me apologize for being late. And I tried to call ahead. I'm so sorry. I respect everybody's time. I don't think there's one area that is more important than the other. I think we can do many things simultaneously. I think we can deal with making sure people come home that have served too much time on parole to come home to be, successful. I think we can deal with voting rights. I think we can deal with everything. At one time, we have so many partners, so many people pulling different levers. I think we can get it all done.
Thank you for sharing.
I like your thinking, bro.
Yes, and then even moving from that point to accountability and impact, because reform work requires us to track progress, right, while we tell the story. So we talk about, and we touched on it a bit when it comes to data and accountability. What data tracking systems or community oversight structures have you implemented to ensure that transparency was there in reform outcomes?
Well, I mean, directly to some of the things that I've done, we've been able to track those things by progress or by the achievements. So the Voter Restoration Act, we've been able to track how many people we've signed up to register to vote that are previously incarcerated. And actually, I'm glad you asked that question. We're getting ready to jump into something else. I was getting ready to reach out to you, Dr. Pryor. One of the young men that was actually upstate with me when I wrote the act came home. He's been home for 3 years. GT, I think he's been home for 3 years, 3.5 years. Is off parole, has graduated last month from John Jay, is going to law school. He did all this in 3 years. He registered to vote, and he went away to Philly. Was you in Philly last week? I know you was in Philly last week, right? Went to Philly last week. When he came home this Monday, he saw a document from the Board of Elections that revoked his right to vote. And it was because, now the law says the day you come home from prison, you can vote.
That's right.
So he registered and he voted. He voted for the judges last year. So the Board of Elections, for some reason, in the city sent out a felony notification which tells the Board of Elections locally that you don't have the right to vote because you were convicted of a felony. But so
It's wrong.
That's
It's
right,
wrong.
no,
And-
right. It's wrong. So we've been working with them for the last year, telling them that the felony notification is basically null and void, because if you're convicted and you don't get time, you don't lose your right. And if you're convicted, as soon as you come home and register, you have your right back. So notification doesn't do anything. What's the point of it? And it's just ironic that this is the young man that came home, who did this, and he's one of the people. So right now what we've got to do is reach out citywide to find out how many other people this happened to. Because a lot of folks are not going to go vote to the 24th, but the last day for you to register was the 14th. So you lose your right to vote in this election, which is one of the most important elections we have, right? I know that sounds cliche, but it really is in this situation. So now that's going to be something we have to track, and that's why I was going to reach out to Dr. Pryor,
Sure.
because his work at Betty Evans and with the Institute, it works out so we can do that.
Really, and I also want to put my former organization, Legal Action Center, on the spot, because this is something that we have worked extensively on
Okay.
and sent letters and engaged Board of Elections on the errors. These are not acceptable
Yeah, no,
errors.
they're not harmless.
They're not harmless at all, and that there needs to be an investment in clarifying to community what is and isn't correct. They cannot keep relying on us to correct them.
Well, we'll have a conversation.
Yeah, it's just
Even
a
though I'm late, something came out of it. Look at you, it's a great question. Something came out of it in 5 minutes. And we already know Kevin is in it. You know, no matter what, we drag him into everything. So that's not even an issue. So thank you for asking that question.
I love the coming together. It's so beautiful. Thank you so much. Now, lastly, we cannot end this discussion without talking about the youth. And prevention is just as crucial as reentry. And as someone who works with youth, as I am a young person myself, I've seen how early exposure to mentorship and advocacy can change the trajectory of a young person's life. And so I wanted to ask you, how can we cultivate the next generation of advocates through youth councils, internships, or even school-based initiatives to sustain the long-term reform efforts?
Well, let me say this. I have a team of youth on the street in all of the boroughs. You'll see them wearing these light green shirts, jackets, and hats that say PPA. PPA stands for People Police Academy. And I'm doing that intentionally, preparing young people to assume positions of leadership. I mean, you know, we have people talking about youth, and they love the youth, and then they have these meetings, and there's no youth at the meeting. You know, they have the meeting during the day when the youth are in school, so there's no way that they can attend the meeting. So you got to put your money where your mouth is. So I pay every year like thousands of dollars in internships for young people, and we actually take them through rigorous training. In fact, we got a new team in Bed-Stuy, so I'm just so excited about that, because all of them were what they they call gang affiliated, right? I don't use those kind of terms. They were street organization affiliated, right? And these are individuals who are brilliant, who are bright, who are creative, who are innovative, who simply need an opportunity to use those skills in a constructive way, and someone who has the courage and the bravery to show them how to do that. I like to be one of those persons. I don't have a problem whatsoever in passing the mantle. In fact, as I was saying to you earlier, I'm looking to pass the mantle. I can't get out the way fast enough. I already went into retirement once in 2019. I plan on going back in another few more years. So my last couple of years is going to be intentionally focusing on young people who have extraordinary potential, and I'm just going to give. Everything I have belongs to them. There's nothing that I want to withhold from them, and I want to make sure that they're equipped because they have a very serious challenge in the upcoming years.
That's right. I would say that is the most fundamental element driving the work that I'm doing with the National Black Harm Reduction Network, because we're not looking at just drug policy, we're looking at the harms of being black in this country. And that drug policy and overdose as a manifestation of these inequities is one thing, but this is about cross-generational, right? I'm Gen X. I want to help millennials and Zs, and I want to push as many boomers into the closet or what have you out of the way, because they are blocking the ascension of young leadership. And I want to be somebody who can contribute, dump as much as I can out of whatever's left in this brain, and support from afar. My turn is over, right? So right now we're trying to build a base. I want to be able to leave a well-resourced base from which young people build, whether it's about policy advocacy, whether it's about building out mutual aid, whether it's about the realization of by us, for us. Right now, you know, we are seasoned and we have some things to be able to invest. But once we do that, we need to be out of your way.
So I'll take you back to 2019 when Horizons and Crossroads started receiving young people from Rikers Island. And I was one of the organizations in Horizons and Crossroads. Before they had youth development officers, they had correction officers in there. And some of my housing units, I would set up mini chapters. I have a chapter president, I knew who the leader was, and I have a chapter vice president. And I would give them particular tasks, like one time I brought a bank manager there, and they were able to organize the group, and I would give them awards and like, you know, just whatever it is to encourage them, right? Fast forward in now, but let me pause on that real quick, because I must say about this brother right here, when I first started 100 Suits, we make 15 years January 12th, but even a year before that, and he'll tell you, even a year before that, so we're talking 16 years, I went to this man's office. I told him I had an idea. I was a customer service rep at the bank right around the corner. And this gentleman sat with me with a designer, and he is the person that came up with the 100 Suits logo. Nobody knows that. A lot of people don't know that logo they see across the country and been on documentaries was from this man's office. When I came in there with a simple idea, and I'll go back to when I told you, you are the change. When you want to change legislation, you go to your elected official and tell them what you want to do, what you don't see. Fast forward into now, in the end of April, we lost one of our participants to gun violence. And I remember very clearly, he's 16 years old. It was tragic because it was all over the news and shared all over social media. In Queens. And I remember when it happened, again, preventive, getting on the phone with the superintendent and letting her know we need to do something right away. So we invested $8,000 immediately in the schools that the young people were in, that his friends were in, to get them off the street, stipend-based, throughout the end of the school year, to make sure that we are keeping them busy every week. And I started a poetry slam competition. And so this is this year. So we have Springfield campus, we have Eagle Academy, August Martin, right? These are all schools this young person had people in, right? And we just awarded our slam champion $1,000 this past Monday. And they're going to be hired. These are young people, 14 to 15 years old. They're going to be hired next year when we go back into the schools to teach spoken word in the after-school setting. That's how you become preventive. You show leadership. I invested $10,000 in partnership with AT&T to youth, just to start your own business. When you talk about Forrest Bias, the founder of Fubu Kane, he was one of my speakers, right? And so I really am big on promoting and making sure our young people know that their worth. But more importantly, we have to understand that gun violence does not stop at 24, because we have a whole patch of people that begin at 25, right? And giving them the same intensity that we're getting. In our catchment area, and I'm a part of the crisis management system through DYCD, we have a 54% reduction in gun violence in our community. 54%. 411 days without one shooting in our catchment area. And it was ran by a group of superheroes, not workers, superheroes who believed that they could put a dent in the universe. That's how you help pour into the community.
Love it. Love it.
Thank you so much for sharing. And thank you all for your insights and your experiences. And to everyone that is here, thank you for coming. So we wanted to take a few moments to open up the floor for questions for those that are gathered here or even online. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask away.
Yes, we have one question from online. As we commemorate Juneteenth and reflect on freedom and progress, how can we ensure that justice reform goes beyond legislation to create real sustained second chances, particularly for those impacted by systemic racism and mass incarceration?
I would say make sure that you find a group that you believe in their work. Research every group, find a group, and volunteer, donate, and pull other people into that group so that the work that they're doing becomes sustainable. You know, it's really hard when you have a few people that are over a whole bunch of different pieces of justice reform, and they have an organization of maybe 5 people and 3 of them are volunteers. The more you believe in something, the more you want something to go forward, you have to join in and put your hands to the grind and really get it done.
Skin in the game.
Yeah.
That's absolutely.
Sweat equity is
That's
important.
right.
I think you can't be afraid to go back where you came from and pull folks up. It reminds me of a story of a guy who was in the desert, he fell in a hole, he was calling for somebody to come help him get out. Somebody came and he said, please, I'm stuck in a hole, help me out. The guy said, let me go get a ladder, but he didn't come back. So a few days later, he's still yelling, screaming, somebody comes by and says, listen, please don't leave me, I've been in this hole, I need to get out. I've been down in this hole before. I had to come down in order to help you get up. That's my final word.
Mic drop. Thank you so much. Thank you. And I just love the collective beat that I've been hearing throughout these questions. Is not only Tracy Gardner, you mentioned creating that base, but then also like creating that pipeline. So then things are getting passed down, whether it's to the next generation or just helping somebody else that could attain this information and attain their equipment and just amplification to do civic engagement and advocacy and policy work. So thank you for sharing. Are there any other questions? We're good? All right. Well, thank you so much again to our wonderful panelists and to all of those that are here. It was wonderful being your moderator for the evening. And so as we transition into tomorrow's Juneteenth celebration, we are here, y'all. Let's carry this insightful dialogue with us as we continue to build for effective and lasting change. So thank you so much again. Have a good night.